There's something almost meditative about the moment just before a kitchen comes to life. The sharp smell of fresh herbs, the soft click of a gas burner catching flame, the way flour dust catches the light when you open a bag at 5 in the morning. I lived in that silence for years. I built an empire inside it, one recipe at a time, while my siblings stood at the front of the restaurant, shaking hands and laughing too loudly at their own jokes. My name is Rachel, and for a long time, I believed that the work itself was enough. I believed that doing the right thing, building something real, pouring everything I had into a shared dream, I believed that would protect me. I was wrong about that, but I was right about something else. Something that took my sister and my brother an embarrassingly long time to figure out. When you kick the foundation out from under a house, you don't inherit the house. You inherit the rubble. My family has been in the food business for 3 generations. My grandmother started it as a small catering operation out of her home kitchen in Ohio, mostly church dinners and wedding receptions for people in our county. My mother scaled it into a proper catering company with a commercial kitchen and a staff of 12. By the time my siblings and I were old enough to be part of the business, it had grown into something more: a catering operation, a small event venue, and a single restaurant location that my mother had opened the year I turned 16. I was the one who spent my summers in that kitchen. While my older sister was doing cheerleading and my brother was playing baseball and complaining about everything that wasn't baseball, I was standing next to my mother learning the difference between a roux and a slurry, learning why you bloom spices in fat before you add liquid, learning that food isn't just sustenance, it's language. My mother used to say that a meal tells people who you are before you ever open your mouth. I carried that with me into everything I made. By the time I was in my late 20s, I had taken over the culinary side of the business completely. I had developed what became our signature menu, 32 original recipes that we used across catering events, the restaurant, and a line of prepared foods we sold to 3 regional grocery chains. I had also, on my own initiative and with my own attorney, filed trademark applications for our brand name, our logo, and the trade name we used on all our packaged products. My mother knew. She was proud. She called me her quiet engine. My siblings barely noticed. They were too busy being the face of the company at networking events and Chamber of Commerce dinners, too busy printing business cards with their names in large font. When my mother was diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's 3 years ago, she made the decision to step back from day-to-day operations and let the 3 of us run things together. She sat us down at the kitchen table, the same table where she'd taught me to make her mother's pot roast when I was 9 years old, and she told us she trusted us. She said she wanted us to keep building what she and my grandmother had started. My sister nodded with the focused expression she uses when she's pretending to listen. My brother was on his phone. What followed was 18 months of what I can only describe as watching someone slowly dismantle a machine they don't understand. My sister took over operations and immediately began cutting costs in ways that made no sense to anyone who understood the business. She switched protein suppliers to save 4% on our catering contracts, which cost us our relationship with a hotel client that had been booking us for their corporate events for 11 years. She hired a front-of-house manager for the restaurant, who had never worked in food service before, but had gone to college with her, which is a sentence that should tell you everything you need to know. My brother handled marketing and sales, which mostly meant he posted photos of himself at events on the company's social media and sent emails that he had someone else write. I kept cooking. I kept developing. I kept the kitchen staff running at the level they needed to run at, kept the grocery chain relationships healthy, kept working on 2 new product lines that I believed could expand our retail footprint significantly. I had been in conversations with a regional distributor about placing our packaged foods in 47 additional store locations. It would have been the biggest growth moment in the company's history. I was 6 weeks away from finalizing the terms. That was when my sister called the meeting. She didn't tell me what it was about ahead of time. She just said there was something she and my brother needed to discuss with me about the direction of the company, and that I should come to the office on a Tuesday afternoon. I remember thinking it was probably about the supplier situation, or maybe finally about the front-of-house manager who had now driven off 3 experienced servers in 4 months. I made a cup of tea. I pulled my hair back, and I drove to the office thinking I was about to help solve a problem. I was the problem they wanted to solve. My sister sat at the head of the table with a manila folder in front of her, and the particular expression she's worn since childhood, when she's decided she's being reasonable. My brother sat to her right with his arms crossed and didn't make eye contact when I walked in. I sat down. My sister opened the folder. She slid a piece of paper across the table to me. It was a buyout offer. I looked at the number. I looked at her. I looked at the number again. "We think it's time for a restructure," she said. "The culinary direction isn't aligned with where we want to take the brand. We want to modernize. Broaden the appeal. We've been talking to a consultant who specializes in scaling food businesses, and he has a lot of ideas about streamlining the menu and moving away from the artisan positioning." I asked her what that meant. My brother unfolded his arms long enough to gesture vaguely at the air. "It means we want to go more mass market. Less complicated. Stuff that's easier to replicate at volume without being so dependent on." He paused. "Search for the word on any one person's involvement. Any one person." He couldn't even say my name. I told them I didn't want to be bought out. I told them about the distributor deal, that we were 6 weeks from 47 new store locations, that the retail line was exactly the kind of scalable revenue they were apparently looking for. My sister smiled the smile she uses when she's already decided not to hear you. She said they appreciated my contribution, but that going forward, they wanted to take the business in a different direction, and they felt the buyout was a fair reflection of my years of service. Years of service. Like I was a retired employee, not a co-owner. Not the person whose hands had built every single product with their name on it. I told them I would not be signing anything. My brother made a sound not quite a laugh, something between dismissal and discomfort, and said that, either way, my position in the company was being eliminated. They had already spoken to an attorney. They had already structured the transition. The kitchen staff would be managed going forward by the new operations consultant. I was no longer needed on site. I stood up. I picked up my tea. I told them they should have their attorney call my attorney. My sister said, "Rachel, don't be dramatic. You've always made things harder than they need to be. Just take the offer and move on." I walked out of that office, sat in my car in the parking lot for about 4 minutes, and then I called my attorney. Not to be dramatic. Not because I was emotional. Because I am a methodical person, and the methodical thing to do when your siblings try to cut you out of a company you helped build was to immediately get in touch with the person who had been helping you protect it for the past 7 years. My attorney's name is Caroline, and she is extraordinarily good at her job. When I told her what had happened, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Rachel, do they know about the filings?" I told her I didn't think so. She made a sound I had never heard from her before. It was almost like relief on my behalf, which is not something Caroline typically performs. "Okay," she said. "Don't sign anything. Don't respond to anything. Let me pull everything together and call you in the morning." I drove home. I cooked dinner not because I was hungry, but because it was the thing I knew how to do when the world felt like it was tilting sideways. I made my grandmother's pot roast, the one my mother had taught me at that kitchen table, and I ate it alone and thought about everything I had built and everything they thought they were taking. What my siblings did not know, what they had never bothered to ask about, had never shown enough interest in the business to learn, was the full picture of how our brand was legally structured. The trademark for our company's consumer-facing brand name. The name printed on every package in those grocery stores. The name on the website. The name on the event venue signage. It had been filed under my name, not the company's. Mine. When I had worked with Caroline 7 years ago to protect our intellectual property, the company had not yet been formally restructured after my mother expanded into retail, and the filing had been made with me as the individual owner. We had always planned to transfer it formally to the company entity once the restructuring was complete. My mother had known about this. It had simply never been formally completed. The paperwork had sat in a pending state for years because there was always something more pressing, and because it had never mattered before, because we had been a family operating in good faith. My sister and brother thought they owned a business. What they actually owned, I would learn from Caroline the next morning, was a kitchen, a venue, a catering operation, and a restaurant, all operating under a brand name they had no legal right to use. Every package in those grocery stores, every contract with every hotel and corporate client that referenced our trade name, every piece of signage, the website domain, all of it was built on a trademark that belonged to me personally. The first sign that things were not going well came about 3 weeks after I left. A member of the kitchen staff, a woman named Gloria, who had worked with me for 6 years and who I consider one of the finest prep cooks I have ever worked alongside, sent me a text message that said simply, "They changed the pot roast recipe, using the new supplier's beef." It's not right." I thanked her and told her I was sorry. I meant it. The second sign came from the regional distributor I had been working with. He called my personal cell because he had my number from our months of negotiation, and he said he was confused because he had received an email from someone at our company, apparently my brother, saying that the product line expansion was on hold indefinitely while they evaluated strategic direction. He said he had other partners interested in the shelf space. He said he couldn't hold it. 47 store locations. Gone. The third sign was a review, the kind of review that spreads. A long-standing catering client, a corporation that had been booking us for their quarterly board dinners for 8 years, posted publicly that their most recent event had been a disappointment. Different quality than expected. Not what they were used to. They would be exploring other options. I read that review on a Thursday morning drinking coffee on my back porch, and I felt the particular sadness of watching something you built get taken apart by people who didn't understand what held it together. By the time Caroline had completed her analysis and sent me a formal summary of my legal position, the company had already lost 2 catering clients, fumbled the distributor deal, and received notice from one of the grocery chains requesting a product quality review meeting. All of this in under 2 months. My attorney's summary was 31 pages. I will not walk you through all 31 pages, but the relevant points were these. The trademark on our consumer brand was owned by me individually, had been for 7 years, was fully registered and protected, and the company's use of it without a licensing agreement constituted infringement. Additionally, 4 of our grocery chain contracts had been signed by me personally as an authorized representative, and those contracts contained renewal clauses that required my signature. Without my involvement, those contracts could not be renewed. The grocery chains had not been notified of my departure. They had, in fact, been corresponding with me as recently as 6 weeks prior. Caroline recommended we begin with a formal cease and desist regarding the trademark, followed by notification to the grocery chains that the signatory on their contracts was no longer affiliated with the company, and a formal demand for licensing negotiations or immediate rebranding. I gave her the go-ahead on a Friday afternoon. I then made myself dinner, something simple, just pasta with a brown butter sauce and fresh sage, and I slept better than I had in months. The call came on a Wednesday. My sister called my personal cell at 8:47 inches the morning, which is unusual because my sister and I had not spoken since I walked out of that conference room. Her voice was different from what I expected, not the polished, controlled tone she uses when she thinks she's winning. Something tighter. Something that sounded like a person standing at the edge of a very deep hole looking down. "We got a letter," she said. "From your attorney." I told her I was aware of that. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Rachel, what did you do?" And I thought about that question. I thought about what I had done, not in the past 2 months, but in the years before that. The 5 in the morning starts. The recipe development journals I kept in longhand, 63 of them stacked in my home office. The meetings with Caroline. The trademark applications. The contracts I had reviewed line by line. The relationships I had built one meal at a time. The grocery chain buyers I had taken to lunch and listened to and understood. Because understanding people is something you learn when you spend your life in a kitchen, when your whole job is to figure out what someone needs and give it to them in a form they didn't know they were hungry for. I told her I had done my job. Another silence. And then her voice went somewhere I had not heard it go before, somewhere that almost sounded like she finally understood that she was talking to someone she had never actually seen. "The grocery chains are asking questions," she said. "And the branding? The attorney is saying we can't." "You can't use the name," I said. "Not without a license. You'd need to rebrand entirely, or negotiate terms with me directly. Your attorney can call Caroline. She'll walk you through the options." The options, as it turned out, were not good for them. Rebranding an established food business, pulling every package from 3 grocery chains, redesigning all signage, updating every contract, rebuilding consumer recognition from scratch, was an undertaking that their consultant estimated would cost somewhere between $340,000 and $500,000, not including the revenue lost during the transition period. The grocery chains, upon learning that the person who had signed their contracts was no longer with the company, had significant concerns about continuity. One of them paused their orders pending legal review. That alone cost the company $22,000 in the first month. My brother called 3 days after my sister. He did not start with pleasantries. He said, "This is not what Mom would have wanted." I thought about my mother. I thought about her sitting at that kitchen table, teaching me that a meal tells people who you are before you open your mouth. I thought about the fact that she had been proud of me, that she had called me her quiet engine. I told my brother that what Mom would have wanted was for us to build something together, and that he and our sister had made a different choice, and now there were consequences to that choice. He started to say something about family, about blood, about how this was petty. I listened. I let him say all of it, and when he was done, I told him that Caroline would be in touch with their attorney and that I was happy to discuss a licensing arrangement that would allow them to continue operating under the brand at a fair market rate, with terms that reflected my actual contribution to building it. He hung up. That was the last time I spoke to him for 4 months. The negotiations took 11 weeks. During those 11 weeks, I consulted with 3 of the kitchen staff members who had reached out to me, developed 2 new recipes I had been thinking about for months, and had 3 separate conversations with the regional distributor who, as it turned out, had not filled that shelf space yet. He was still interested. He had always been interested. He was just waiting to know who he was actually doing business with. The final licensing agreement gave me a royalty on every unit sold under the brand name, a formal co-ownership stake in the trademark going forward, and a consulting role that paid me a salary commensurate with what I should have been earning for the previous 3 years. My sister remained in her operational role. My brother remained in marketing. We did not return to being close. We probably never will, but the business did not die, which is what would have happened if we had continued down the path they had chosen, and which is something I did not want despite everything. My grandmother built something. My mother grew it. I was not prepared to let my siblings burn it to the ground because they forgot to read the paperwork. My mother, when I explained everything to her, over the phone from her chair in the sunroom, where she takes her afternoons now, was quiet for a long moment. And then she laughed, a real one, the kind that starts in the chest. She said, "I always told you, the kitchen teaches patience. You just have to wait for the right temperature." I have thought about what I would say to someone who is in the position I was in, watching themselves be pushed aside by people who are louder and more aggressive and more comfortable taking up space. I would say this: your value is not diminished by the fact that they cannot see it. The thing they cannot see is often the exact thing they cannot survive without. The work is the work. Do it with rigor. Document it. Protect it. Not because you're planning for betrayal, but because what you build deserves to be protected. You deserve to be protected. The people who underestimate you are counting on the fact that you'll be too dignified, too conflict averse, too invested in the dream of a peaceful outcome to actually use what you have. They are counting on your patience being a form of surrender. It isn't. Patience is just a long game. And the long game, when you've been building the right things all along, has a way of ending exactly where it should. If anyone ever tells you that you're just a quiet nobody, let them finish talking. Then check the paperwork. The quietest person in the room is almost always the one who read every single line.